Hello, our amazing listeners of NeuroCareers Doing the Impossible. It's your podcast host, Dr. Milena Krastenskaya, or simply Dr. K. And I'm excited to welcome you to the second season of our podcast, exploring entrepreneurial careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Have you ever wondered what it takes to transform brain science into groundbreaking products and services? Are you curious about the fearless visionaries who bridge the gap between neuroscience and entrepreneurship to change people's lives and reshape our world? Are you ready to explore how to navigate the uncharted waters of neurotech entrepreneurship? In season two, we're diving deep into the world of entrepreneurial ventures in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. If you are looking to create an immediate impact and translate your neuroscience and neurotech ideas into innovative services that truly make a difference in the world, this season is tailor made for you. Join us and learn from the best in the field about succeeding in the entrepreneurial journey in neuroscience and neurotechnology where innovation meets impact. We've got an incredible lineup of guests who are not only shaped their careers but have also made a profound impact on the field. Throughout this season, we'll explore the captivating stories of visionaries who've risen to the challenge, who've turned obstacles into opportunities, and who've innovated in ways that are changing the landscape of neurocareers. So, whether you are a seasoned professional in the field, an inspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the intersection of science and business in this ever evolving arena, the season promises inspiration, education, and a glimpse into the exciting future of neurocareers. I am Dr. Milena Krastenskaya, the founder of the Institute of Neuroapproaches, where I help people establish successful careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies through career coaching and education. So let's dive into the entrepreneurial journeys that are shaping the future of neuroscience and neurotechnologies together. Tune in now into the thrilling episode number 69. Dear NeuroCareers podcast listeners, are you ready to dive into the fascinating world of neurotech hardware development and explore the skills and dedication it takes to bring innovative neurotechnology to life? Imagine being at the forefront of creating cutting edge neurotech hardware that can help you achieve an optimal state of mind for completing your daily tasks. Today, we introduce you to an extraordinary entrepreneur who is making his vision a reality. Meet AJ Keller, the CEO of Neurosity, a company that's at the forefront of brain computer interface technology. Under AJ's leadership, Neurosity has created the CROWN, a cutting-edge device designed to elevate your brain's concentration levels, allowing you to achieve peak performance. In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into the world of hardware development for the Neurosity CROWN and explore the essential skills and qualities required for hardware engineering and neurotech. AJ will share insights into the challenges and triumphs of creating this groundbreaking device. We'll also discuss AJ's journey to entrepreneurship, his past experiences, and how they're shaped the path he is on today. We'll also delve into the skills and qualities necessary for success in the ever evolving neurotech industry. AJ's insights are sure to inspire anyone interested in the intersection of technology and neuroscience. Welcome, AJ. It's a great pleasure to have you today on our podcast. Thank you so much for meeting with us. And can you please let our listeners know where you are joining us from what part of the world, and briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, Miliana, and all of your wonderful listeners. My name's AJ. I'm calling in from San Francisco, California, in the United States. It's a beautiful Friday morning here. We've got some fun hackathons happening this weekend, so I'm going to get my coding hat on and put down my hardware hat for a little bit. And I'm going to be staying in San Francisco. We've got a great lab here if anyone ever wants to visit. We always welcome visitors and love doing demos and everything. So just a great place to visit if you're passing through. Look us up on Twitter or anything, and I'm always happy to host.
Thank you so much. I love visiting clubs, development for neurotech, and I will take you on this opportunity when I'm nearby.
Yes, it's very inspirational to come by, and you get to see all of the original prototypes, all the original devices, see maybe some of the latest and greatest stuff that we're working on. So it's very cool to be able to see it from the humble beginnings of a garage in South Carolina to where it is today. That is very cool to see.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I definitely would like to go deeper into that history of the development because it tells a lot. So the process is so valuable. Now, let's just take a step back into your past to see how did you get to the place where you are now. I listened a little bit about your experience as a child and what's motivated you to get eventually into the field of neurotech, where not only we can learn about technology, but technology can learn about us. So, can you tell us about your very beginnings of getting to the field?
It certainly seems to start that I was born in the right place at the right time. My father and mother both worked and are lifelong professionals. My dad, although he was a cardiologist, never was one to, squander his nights and weekends and would build large computer systems at home in his spare time. And some of my earliest memories were, sitting on his lap and learning Linux. I had tremendous privilege of being able to take apart and put together a computer by myself by the time I was 8 or 9, and I'm the youngest of three. So I grew up always wanting to code switch and wanting to fit in with my brother and sister and their friends. So, I think part of me grew up very fast and I turned to computers, and I think I learned they're a great way to spend your days, and learning programming and making applications. And I learned a lot, just from this having to type perspective where I knew I wanted to give back. There's this phrase, this religious phrase, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so the compounding effects of continually working on one thing all of a sudden leads to this beautiful field of neurotech. And it almost feels like the entire field has this shared vision of what the future is supposed to look like. And it's, democratized access to unbiased brain health for everybody, right? So, and everyone sort of agrees on that. And we're all just sort of exchanging ideas on how to get there. When I first started in the field, I was just coming out of, undergrad as a computer engineer and trying to get, neuroscientists to engage with me, through email, and me just saying, hey, I'm trying to build a computer that reads your mind. Can you just tell me where to even get started? I would not get a lot of replies. But I realized that just by listening to what the PhDs were struggling with at that time, it was getting data into a web browser from a USB serial port, which is like the easiest thing I could do because I'm a computer engineer. I did it in 2 days when they were waiting for this other person like for 6 months to do it. And I literally did it over a weekend and came back and said, here it is. Right. And they were like, doesn't make any sense. But the lesson there was that we as people have trained in our own fields, in our own ways. And the field of neuroscience is so nascent that there is tons of problems in every vertical that need to be solved. You could find a group of PhDs who's not working on the computer engineering problem right now, but they're working on the marketing problem. They're working on the user experience problem. They're working on the customer service problem. They're working on all of these different aspects that just because there is this one major that you can focus in on college does not mean that anyone else is prevented from coming into the space. And in fact, you can give these brilliant minds tremendous peace because now they don't have to worry about the thing that they didn't go to school for, right? And now all of a sudden they have someone who's as equally excited about the same vision, but is able to approach it with their own experience. And I think learning that really allowed me to accelerate and be now at a point where I just can be AJ.
Yes, thank you so much for this introduction. And it looks like when you were growing up as bilingual, but your second language was programming.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny enough. In high school, I went to a boarding school. So I lived away for high school. At the age of like 14, I left home and I was taking Latin because they said that you take Latin if you want to do well in the SATs. And then I heard this rumor that you could take programming as a foreign language and it would count as your foreign language requirement. So needless to say, that was the last Latin class I ever took and started taking programming literally as my foreign language, like junior year of high school and never looked back.
Yes. So when did your interest in neuroscience start? Can you recall that moment? What did inspire you to start looking into neurotech, neuroscience?
I have always been really into introspection. It's easier for me to do introspection than it is for me to take action moving forward. So I always was very interested in human behavior. And I started trying to understand, and I eventually found out you can take psychology in school and college, even if you're not a psychology major, right? So I was computer engineering, which, seems pretty far away from psychology, but I was able to take psych, 201. And my gosh, I was just fascinated, right? The study of humans through behavior. I was like, this is it. This is, I love this, right? It was something that really stuck out to me and answered a lot of the questions I had while doing introspection, right? Was what was someone's motivation for doing that behavior, right? And why? Like, was it something I did? Was it something they did? I do remember this idea that, my dad instilled in me very young, which was, why is the computer in this place where it doesn't know I want to save a document when I have finished writing a document? And this was like in the Microsoft Clippy days, where like there was that little Clippy in the bottom of Microsoft Word and it'd be like, looks like you're writing a resume, like very rudimentary, but that's really stuck with me. This idea that like, why do computers not learn from our behaviors, just like how we learn from the behaviors of humans, right? Like what's happening here? It seems like a huge missed opportunity that, you look at the computer terminals as like the first thing that learned nothing about the human. It didn't allow the human to do any preferences, right? You look at the iPhone now and you pick someone else's iPhone up, you can tell immediately, because the home screen looks different, the background looks different. A lot of it's fundamentally different. So you have this sort of spectrum of increasing personalization when it comes to the interface between hardware that seems to naturally be increasing in the ability for the user to create a unique experience that mimics the way their mind works. And so I really continuously saw that. And then really one of the two final things I'd say that really made me want to do it was I was a robotics engineer at Boeing, and I was listening on audiobooks to Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. At the same time, I was working on my second iOS photo sharing app that would allow you to share, 10 photos from a recipe and then create a list, step one, step two, step three, and then share that in a feed or through a link to anyone, on the web. This was before Instagram allowed you to do multiple photos per post. So it was like this huge thing. And it allowed you to create these BuzzFeed type lists and starting to get users. But I realized, after reading Peter Thiel's book that if I got, a million users, that would be amazing. And I would be so excited, right? But that's less than 1% market share of Instagram. And I started realizing, I was like, that's not something that I want to do. It wasn't that impactful. It felt like I was following my wallet, this idea. And I think I came from enough privilege and wanted to follow this to whom much is given that it did not feel okay for me to pursue something out of the sheer desire to get more money. That's really where I wanted to follow my heart. And at this time, when I was working on the advanced research and robotics, division at Boeing, we were looking for things to automate to help people, with ergonomics. We saw these people sanding the stowage bins that come down on the top. Like, it is a terrible ergonomic thing. And so we were trying to automate that. And in that process, I was trying to work with robots. I was being trained to work with robots. And most of the robots that Boeing was using would kill you if they hit you. It's sort of like the sawmill problem, where when obstruction is hit, the system increases torque to move through the problem, not immediately stop and like back off, but in fact, it speeds up and it applies more pressure because that's the way it's designed, right? But there was this new type of robot called a collaborative robot, a human safe robot that when it would hit you, would stop. And and I looked, and the amount of these that were coming into the industry was exponentially increasing. And now it's funny, the lab I work in San Francisco has a robot that's running there, and it's a collaborative robot, right? And it runs, it doesn't have a huge gate around it that you have to like lock in and tag out and do all these safety precautions, because if it hits you, it stops, right? And that's an amazing thing. But the interface with them was so rudimentary. You had one person holding a tablet, another person trying to move it, and like another person trying to like program. I mean, it was a mess. And I realized that if you could just have one mental tap with this robot, that would dramatically improve the quality of the relationship between the assembler and the collaborative robot that was going to be working with them soon. And knowing that collaborative robots are going to exponentially be increasing on the floor, I said, this is potentially a great first application for something new here, right? And I just really wanted to improve. And I said, if I can just make one brain tap out of this, this will be useful. And we could imagine that if like there's an arm swinging a big object and it's going to collide with another one, a worker could see that error and the brain computer could pick up on that faster, and then they could yell stop or run over and hit a button and potentially save tens of millions of dollars in carbon fiber parts, right? Because these things are expensive. Planes cost like $300 million, So those things, all of those really were swirling in my head, this like desire to want to give back, this desire to want to create a new computer, this complete understanding of the fundamentals of computers, because I got that from computer engineering, where I knew down to the atom level how computers worked. All of this really combined to give me to a point where I was able to have a conversation with a very close advisor. And he gave me this advice that said, follow your heart and not your wallet. And I realized how privileged I was to be able to even follow that, to be able to throw out this need to be able to make money, to be able to go move into my parents' basement. I had a full-time job. I was living the American dream. I think I even posted on Instagram, got my dream job at Boeing. I had a BMW coupe. I was doing it all, but it just wasn't happiness. And what happiness to me at that point was being able to work on something every single day that wouldn't immediately be solved, and something that was technologically impossible given today's technology, but physically feasible. The physics is there, but we just don't have the technology to access it yet. And I wanted to pick an idea that really modeled that, and that was also 0 to 1, and I just started diving in, and I think very quickly on there was this beautiful relationship that was so enticing, where the body is this not 100% system. It's random, but it's like quantumly random, and the computer is classically predictive and incredibly, exactly what next steps are going to happen because it's programmatically happening, right? And there was this great like conundrum between like, even if we had a perfect connection system between the two, a perfect brain computer interface language translator, there's still all of this amazing software that will have to be built and redesigned. And I had a minor in AI, so I understood neural networks, and I really like understood that even if I solved the BCI problem today, I could still spend the next 30 years creating an entire world of applications and miniaturizing computers and giving impact. But it was just this huge 30-year problem that I could work on. And every part of my body and being was telling me to do it. Was telling me to sell my car, break the lease, go move up to my parents' basement that was in Connecticut, right outside New York, and started meeting some, incredible companies and just really, making it happen. But that's really where that journey starts and why that happened. It was very multifaceted, but by the time I started on it, there was like incredible conviction to when people would say like, well, how are you leaving your job at Boeing? I'd be like, well, I'm going to work on this app, but I didn't feel right. And then all of a sudden, when I had this conviction, even when people would look at me like, you're crazy, I can't believe you left a job like that to go try and build a what? Like a thought computer, or what are you calling it? But I was like, you know what? I'm crazy. I guess I'm crazy. Like, I'll never forget one of my neighbors who like was the second mom to me, looked at me, and she loves me deeply, but she looked concerned. In 2015, she looked concerned, and she said, like, oh, okay. But I was like, I think I might be crazy, but that's okay, I guess. And that's what, gave me a lot of the strength to keep going through the tough times, is that I knew that this pursuit gave me tremendous happiness and fulfillment, and it was really great. So, it's one of those things where I thought it was a good idea and it only got better and more closer to home as I continued to study it and bring people along and meet people along the way. It just got more and more enticing. So just really lucky that I was able to find this and be in a position where I had this freedom of thought, where I had a great job out of college and I was able to work on the weekends for my own self. And I was able to set up an LLC, which protected my IP from Boeing at the time. And just all this amazing, because my mom was a lawyer and she, taught me how to speak legalese as a kid. And, it's all of this, real amazing luck and opportunity that I think I just want to make sure I don't squander and try to give back as much as possible. So it just has been a really good journey.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all these insights and telling about that motivation within you that really prevailed. At what moment did this idea of creating a device to help people focus, to help people with concentration was born? How did this happen? I'm already getting closer to your crown device.
Yeah, I think I would just start off by saying there's a fantastic juxtaposition between myself and my co-founder that both he and I were just made blatantly aware of. It's like almost to a comical level. On the spectrum, we're on two separate sides when it comes to ADHD. And I certainly do not have the worst ADHD in the world by any means, but you look at my desk and it's just filled with clutter. And I love big monitors and I love being able to see many things. And I love the chaos. It actually feels comforting in the chaos. I don't know. I just love it. And you look at my co-founder who would come in and keep his desk 100% clean and wouldn't have any monitor and would just have his MacBook Pro writing code, with one screen in focus mode. He would come sit down, immediately get to work, even if it wasn't something exciting. I was like, what is happening here? And you have me, who is like a ping pong ball when it's something's not interesting, bouncing all over the room. And it was just this amazing where I had like 6 desks in the room and he had one desk. And I was the hardware guy, so we allowed it. But it was just so funny that just the differences in minds, right? And I think that was very aware, when we were first starting. But definitely keep in mind our intent for Neurosity, right, is to create this new computing platform that ushers in this, new era of nobody saying I'm not good with technology, because all technology is simply an extension of natural thought. And everything is just a thought or feeling away from being accessed by you instantaneously, right? So he and I both agree that that's what we want to work on. And we'll get there by any means necessary, so long as we follow the core values of Neurosity: customer centricity, honesty, privacy, autonomy, and judgment. Those 5 core principles really, drive a lot of what we do, and also our vision to become the most loved and trusted neurotechnology company in the world. And so that was really our creed that we started with. And he and I both started because we wanted to make software. No, we didn't want to make hardware. I might have secretly wanted to make hardware. I don't know. Don't tell anybody. But we wanted to make software. And we couldn't because the hardware didn't exist. We realized it was a hardware problem. So we created the Notion DK1, which was the first device to ever have a CPU and a brain imaging integrated circuit put on one device with isolation. But this essentially allowed us to run Linux on our brain imaging headset, which allowed us to have an incredibly easy to use API. And we actually made the API before we ever made the hardware. We said, wouldn't it be amazing if this is how easy it was to make an application with a brain computer? And then we made the hardware to fulfill that API. And it ended up being an incredibly great insight by, Alex and maybe myself, but to build the API first, then build the hardware because we can now prototype apps incredibly quickly, right? And we were trying to figure out, what do we do with this hardware to drive enough value so that people like us would buy it and give us support in enough time so that we can keep getting towards our vision of this new computing platform that is taking brain activity as input, running multiple applications in parallel that are unique to the user, that are giving that user tremendous value every single day, right? And so we need to find a vehicle to get that done. And we come up with this idea of like a focus algorithm because we were looking at the way people were using all these different things for heart rate tracking and running and all these step counters. We said people probably want to track their focus like they track their pace. And we also had tried previously to that, I would say, we had tried creating kinesis, which was based on motor imagery. And this was a lot of the work I did before Alex and I actually met up to join the company in 2018. During that 2015 to 2018 period, I was running a consulting company. I was reprogramming the firmware, drivers, graphical user interface for a company called OpenBCI and was getting paid as a contractor then. And I was taking all the capital I was making and being able to put that into creating this motor imagery based software. But I learned that if you send raw data to another device for processing, that connection will ultimately fail. And so you have to do the processing on the device, which made me understand I had to put the computer on the device, which then I met Alex. I showed him what I was working on. He said, I get it. Let's do it. He made the design. I made the hardware actually work in that design. And now we're putting it out. And I had this kinesis software where you could essentially think to scroll using motor imagery, but the reliability wasn't good enough. So we knew that we couldn't have a customer buy it for that purpose because they would be ultimately disappointed and would like return it. So we said, okay, let's find a stronger, more compelling reason that a person would purchase this and hold us responsible for its quality and actually get usefulness out of it. And that's really why we shipped with focus tracking on the initial Notion DK1. We shipped the first version of the device. It's showing your focus change over time. It seems to work. It's based on gamma activity. This is really the first consumer device that's able to measure gamma activity. It's a bit smaller than the other brain activities for meditation. So the Muse, things like that, couldn't pick up on this type of activity. But the CROWN but the Notion DK1 was able to. But it turned out that like this wasn't a product that people were picking up every single day and remembering to even use. Even people who said, I want to buy this for the focus tracking, bought it for the focus tracking, used it and didn't return the product. But like they just said, their data, the data showed, right, that like when they got it, they would use it for a little bit and then they'd stop using it. And so we started doing user research and we were not good at user research back then. So I would say bad user research is not helpful for anything, but maybe performing actions that may get you to another set of user research. But we said, okay, wow, maybe we need to maximize focus. Like that's what people will actually pay for. It sounds like that's what people want is this ability to pick music with your brain that drives your focus up. So Alex agreed on that. He got to work and all of a sudden he comes back with this Spotify integration that you pick a playlist and it grabs a song from that playlist and it extracts the features that are in that song, like maybe the energy, the danceability, the vocalness, or the speechiness, all these little things that Spotify gives you. And then you wait halfway till the song is through and you say, did the focus increase, decrease, or stay the same? If it increased, you go ask Spotify for another song that sounds like the current song, seeded by the playlist, but has similar features. And if the focus decreased, we'll A/B test what is going to drive your focus up. We'll lower the speechiness of a no song that sounds like the current one, but has less speechiness, and it was really nice. And like all of a sudden it was useful. We're discovering songs that were awesome. Like Spotify's got millions of songs, right? And the average person listens to like maybe 1,000. And so, you're discovering songs from artists you've never heard of, and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's like, wow, maybe we really have something here. But you go and look at the data, and all of a sudden we didn't. It was the same thing where, there's some usage, but there wasn't this daily usage where people were getting tremendous value out of the product. And at this time, we had gained an advisor who taught us about this thing called ethnographic research. And this was an absolute fundamental game changer in how we approached user research. And instead of asking people what they want, which is like really the first thing you learn not to do in user research with like this book called The Mom Test, you sort of try to understand, what are they doing instead of this? You don't ask how much would you pay for this. You ask like, are you paying for anything that solves this problem today? And how, you sort of work through that. But then this ethnographic research goes another step deeper and says, live with your customers, understand their problems, take a lot of time to interview them over weeks, take tons of notes. Don't try to draw any insights, but just try to observe and understand their motivations, their culture. Where do they learn about information? Why do they learn about information? What are they scared of? What are they excited about? What is their habits? What do they do before they start work? Just like copious amounts of notes and understanding and studying. And all of a sudden, it was as clear as day when you looked at the data, was that it doesn't matter how much you maximize focus if someone couldn't get focused in the first place. And it turned out that focused people knew they were focused and didn't want to be tracked. And unfocused people knew they were unfocused and didn't want to be tracked because they were like, what are you going to do? You can tell me I'm unfocused? Like, yeah, no, I know I'm unfocused. Thanks. And it was like this. I was actually more rude to tell someone that you're not focused and to confirm it. Like it wasn't good. And we learned that there was this fundamental problem where people weren't able to get into a focused state when they wanted to. And Alex and I proposed the question was, what if you could? What if we took software and we, created this way for you to feel focused, by tricking your brain into getting into this state? And it was at this time that I remembered some research that we had seen from some neuromusicians who bought our second development kit and got their PhD in creating music that put people and held people to sleep. And they changed it around a little bit and showed us, that they were able to do something to our focus metric that I had never seen before. So when we were tracking focus, it was really cool. You would see this like classic, it would take 20 minutes for your gamma, this activity to plateau. And then you're plateauing, you're working, and then it would go down after about an hour and a half. And it was like, wow, like literally I get that it takes 20 minutes to get focused again when you get distracted. Like it was wild to see the data so perfectly represented there. And then to even see like the starting of this to disengage prior to me stopping, like it was just super cool to see that. But what these neuromusicians showed us was instead of it taking 20 minutes for this gamma to increase, they got it in like 5 minutes. And instead of it looking like a straight line, it looked like a power curve that very quickly plateaued. And I said, maybe our focus metric's not that accurate. And I put it down for like 6 months and we went and built the Spotify integration. And all of a sudden, when we were saying, okay, well, how do we get people to shift? Like, how do we programmatically increase someone's gamma activity? It came back to me that, remember those 30-minute long tracks that those guys were creating for us? What if instead of getting 4 30-minute songs from them, we get 10 5-minute songs from them? And we tell them to put all of their power, all of their efforts into getting people to switch into a flow state, to switch into that gamma state as fast as possible, 2 minutes or less. How do we do that? Can we do that? Is it possible to take what was once music to help people stay asleep and transform it into this fast delivery mechanism for causing the brain to entrain and switch into this focus state? And as a user myself, someone who did struggle with it, I very quickly understood that this was something useful for me, that this was something that fundamentally was just different in how I was approaching my own work. All of a sudden, this idea of not being able to get work done slowly started disappearing. And I realized at this time that this fear of not getting work done was anxiety. It was a future situation that hadn't happened yet. But this thing was actually so powerful that it would prevent me from starting work. And I would be so nervous that I wouldn't be able to get work done because I hated sending emails to VCs or something, right? Like I wouldn't start on it, right? And all of a sudden, though, when or at least there's a really good chance that, given the fact that you're not feeling anxious, that there's nothing bothering you, like you slept well, that if you were able to enter into that state, you would get great work done. And the fact that all of a sudden I had this tool in my back pocket that gave me a better than I used to have chance at shifting into this flow state, it was useful all of a sudden, especially on the days where I wasn't doing printed circuit board design, which, is like video games for me. I was like, I love it. It's like art and design. It's the best. I don't need to take any Vyvanse for that. I don't need any help shifting into that state. Maybe I need help like going and getting food or something. But, I really realized though that like for the other parts of my life that were causing me stress because I wasn't able to get those done, like creating a financial plan or something like that. But the fact that now I had this almost 100% likelihood of me being able to successfully get that done in the morning, and actually being able to live, there's like this thing that's like, if you have to eat a frog, eat it first thing in the morning. And if you have to eat two, eat the bigger one first. And it's like, that is the most useless piece of advice ever because I can't focus enough to eat the frog. Like I'm just thinking about something else. Like it's just, I can't even think to eat the frog. And all of a sudden, like I had the ability to eat the frog in the morning. And I could all of a sudden then eat eat the smaller frog later because I had already eaten a frog today. And I was like, dang, I can do anything. And there was like this momentum to my life all of a sudden where in getting the thing that I didn't want to get done early on in the morning done, I had this great momentum feeling. I was getting a dopamine release from just being productive on something I didn't think I'd be productive on. And so that's really where I knew we were getting somewhere. And when we launched this shift into focus tagline, the sales at the company took off. And I mean, before that, we were hard selling. We were like, hey, I saw you post on Twitter about brain stuff. We have a new brain stuff. You're a web developer. Like, we really think this could be huge for you. Will you spend $900 and get this? Like, super hard. And as soon as we did that shift into focus, we haven't done any hard selling since then. And we have a steady stream of sales coming in almost constantly because of that. And that's really that power of user research, right? And that is what has done it. But it's really, I would say, only gotten more important, right? That like, I'm not just doing focus now because it's a good product, but it's useful in my own life. And we now have customers all around the world who are using it. And we're discovering incredible things about focus. One thing we've learned recently was that the data is showing that if you're in a less meditative state than normal, you're not going to be able to enter a flow state, or you're going to have a much lower likelihood of having a relative change in brain activity that you would need to have in order to enter that flow state. You'll essentially be stuck at the same level. And if you actually take a step back, do a meditation, increase this alpha, you will actually, by like every time you increase your alpha, you increase the chances of you shifting into a flow state. So this whole thing of you need to move out of an anxious state before you're able to enter a flow state, and being able to then target different brain activity, and understanding that these major brain states are almost like from the software world, a state machine. And it's not just like a one-to-one where you can move, but there's almost a series and a dance of things that is common between people. Whereas if you're in a less meditative state than normal, meaning you're in a more anxious state, it's going to be harder for you to enter into that productive state, right? Especially someone who's neurodivergent. And so, really things just keep seeming to push us towards this goal. And the amazing thing is that now we're working on our fourth generation sensor. We're working on an entirely new headset. And every time we improve the quality of the sensor, that kinesis thing that we were trying to do originally gets better. It gets better. Every time we make the sensor better, that original thing that we wanted to do gets a little bit more reliable. And I think overall, that's really like this overarching proof that my vision is happening. It's taking the amount of time I wanted it to. I wanted to do this for at least 30 years, but you're seeing this instantaneous representation of the journey, right? Where we're making now a nickel sized little thing that sticks to your temple and does just mental states. We don't need to make a general purpose brain computer that can do kinesis and can do visual cortex stuff in the back of the head. We're just focused on the front. And, I think we're going to create a better sensor, and then we'll create a new whole head brain scanning thing that's going to give us even better data. And maybe that one is good enough to get thought recognition working. Maybe not, but we're going to continue to keep working on improving the sensor, inventing new sensing modalities, doing whatever it takes. But at the same time, this technology, because we are cracking a hardware problem that's never been cracked before, gives us this incredible opportunity to help tens of millions of people. Myself and my co-founder have been so profoundly impacted by this. It's really easy for us to get behind it, to stay behind it. And it's really close to some of the original reasons that we got into this field, to help with these mental health issues. And it really seems like, social media is actually the symptom of the problem. It's not the problem. Like the problem's just not being able to focus on something that you need to focus on and being able to do work. So you go to social media to try and get yourself motivated in hopes that you can. And then, it's like a lot of these things that we thought were the problem actually are just symptoms of this inability to consciously move out of one state into this desired state. You look at someone who's depressed. This is someone who's really stuck in a sad state and is unable to get into a mindful state where they're able to let it go, or they're unable to get into like an excited state where they can be productive, right? And they're just like stuck in this state. Someone who's with general anxiety disorders, unable to move out of an anxious state by their own free conscious. And so really like there seems to be this common thread between the majority of mental illness, which is like if you give that person the instantaneous ability to consciously move from one state to the state they want to, and you go check back in their life a year later, they're going to be living a dramatically different life than they were the last time you saw them stuck in a mental state. So, I think ultimately focus has been this tremendous vehicle for us to develop all of this, amazing technology. But now we're seeing that it's just all much more related and it's much more accessible. And there's something we can do for a lot of these today with a new hardware form factor. So yeah, I think that's really how we got to focus, how we got here, where we're going, and why we're on focus right now is it's so impactful. I can use it. It's a real thing for me. It's a real thing for, hundreds of other people across the country already, across the world. And now we want to get the form factor to a size that can bring this to, tens or hundreds of millions of people so they can access the same thing that all of us have already been accessing, who are able to afford the crown. Can we create a new device that's $299 instead of $1,200, right? And something that's more affordable and maybe even, get it paid back by health insurance, things like that, and usher in this new era of scalability when it comes to, brain sensing. And can we make the Aura ring for, brain scanning? And that's really where we're at today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And what were the main changes that you noticed in your life before and after you started using Crown to get focused? Maybe you remember the first things that you were able to get accomplished that you were not able to accomplish before.
Yeah, there's a couple things. For one, finances, reconciling credit card expenses, taking care of things that were personal for my own life, like getting health insurance or just doing these things that generally my anxiety would prevent me because my anxiety was so bad that I had to work on my company right now because this make or break or die. So a lot of these smaller tasks that are really where companies are built. It's not the hardware, it's the distribution of the hardware. It's the support of the hardware. It's the software of the hardware. A lot of the other aspects where companies are actually built, the fundraising, the funding, the banking, all of that stuff, I really struggled with. And so, really, I think the behavior is this ability to start doing that stuff when I wanted to was really tangible. And the last thing I would say is no more working at night. You look at the behavior change. I'm no longer a night person, where I can't get work done during the day. So I have to stay up late at night to get it done because that's just how my body works, saying something like that, right? Like that actually was a symptom of not being able to work in the morning. So I would wake up later in the afternoon, start working, and then all of a sudden the day is running out, which creates an urgency. And an urgency is what gives someone with ADHD the ability to focus consciously, kind of, right? So if something's urgent, interesting, novel, or creative, a person with ADHD can focus on it. But if it's not, they can't. So what I would do is I would save all of this like really important work that I told Alex I would get done before today or it's the deadline. And I would then be able to squeeze it down at night and get it done. And so that really fundamentally was like the frog, right? That I was able to push to the front of the day, get it done, start feeling productive immediately, and really go on about my day. So I think that's really like the major behavior change that you would see.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. And what really impressed me and made me very interested is what you said about your vision for a company that you want to be the most loved and trusted. Yes, so I've heard different visions. I've never heard about being loved. Why that is important for you to be loved as a company, as a product. Not, of course, trusted. Trusted is more understandable, but still, yes, those two things are the main for you. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, certainly by no mistake, which is why I'm smiling. I think I love that part too. And also note that that love comes before trust. I think that's also important. Like there's no mistake in that it's not trusted and loved. It's loved and trusted. I think it's really simple actually why I chose that. And it was because if you take for a second what I predict the future will be to happen, right? Where people have these brain devices on their heads and they're using them, right? Let's pretend that exists. That means that there is most likely choice in the market where you can have an iPhone, an Android, right? You could have Apple's brain reading device. You could have Microsoft's brain reading device. You could have Samsung's brain reading device, LG's, it doesn't matter, right? These are already established companies that have their own sort of things that they can't change or, that just they are already exist, right? And I realized that our customer in the future will have tremendous choice. And the choice will be based on this emotional drive. Who do they love? Who do they trust and love the most, right? Who do they say to their friends, I did try the Apple one, but I really love the Neurosity one, right? And like, I think that's ultimately what I need, what I predict the most successful neurotech company will be based on is this concept of every part of them is made with love and their products are made with love. And it's designed so that people love them. They don't hate them. They love them and they use them and they trust them. And I think ultimately that, that's the vision of the company I want to make where, you have choice as a user, but you're able to pick our one because you love and trust it the most because the company has worked since day one to make sure that, there's nothing that you're opting out of. You're only opting into things if you want to do it, right? And there's no, warranty running out of time. We'll replace it. What's important is that you have the ability to get your data into this system that helps you, right? And it really made us pick customer centricity as our first core value, right? And so all of those values I listed earlier came from that initial statement. And there's one other statement I would say that helped us a lot, which was our mission. And our mission was to build the best brain computers and neuro-powered applications. That was a very general statement, right? But that compounded with, we want to be the most loved and trusted neurotechnology company, and that was our vision. I think those things really played well together and, created this drive for us to not try and make a device that's embedded within headphones, right? Because we're not trying to be the best audio and brain company. We're trying to be the best brain company. So we said, we don't have to do that. Let's just focus on the brain as input, right? And that gave us tremendous freedom. And part of our philosophy is we only work on things that align with our mission. And that's been really helpful for when projects come towards us. We can easily deflect it and say, it's an amazing opportunity and we would love to do this down the road. But right now, we live in a time where the best brain computer doesn't exist. And until that exists, we won't quit and we won't stop until that exists. Whether we make it or someone else makes it, I don't think, really matters, but we're going to keep trying to make, this hardware exist by any means necessary so that this new age of software can be ushered in. And so I think the fact that people have choice, the fact that even if someone got our app, in 20 years, got our brain computer and they're running our app, they could use a third party app because they think it's better at helping them focus. And I think that's like mission achieved. If I ever had a customer say, I stopped using your app because I started using Super Focus's app, right? Because it works better for me, but I was able to take all of my data that I've used on Neurosity and immediately upload it to them. And it was great, but I'm really happy with how Super Focus is made for people with dyslexia or something, right? Or whatever it is, or just made for me, an athlete or something, or it just really works the way my brain works, and it learns me better. I would say that's mission achieved because that's an open market and that's choice, right? And that means that now Neurosity has the opportunity to improve its own products to become that choice again in the customer's mind and to drive that innovation between us and this, fake company called Super Focus, right? And I think that's ultimately what has created, from my perspective, this healthy sort of app ecosystem in Apple, right? Is this balance of being able to let the user have choice of other software. They may not have choice in the hardware they use, but because they love and trust it, but they will have choice again in the software they use. And, in every aspect of it, we have to give, people this ability to have choice and choose what they trust the most and put the onus on the company to have the best product that gives the most value to the user because they trust it. I think that's really where those things come from, how they'll come into play in the future and why they're so important to me.
Thank you so much. Can you talk a bit about the challenges you experienced when building your company, when creating your startup? I know it's not an easy process, and some of our listeners are thinking about creating their own neurotech BCI company in the future. So maybe you can share your experience. What were the challenges, and how did you solve them?
Yeah, the first one was the money challenge. So I had a LLC that I had created. An LLC is like a really easy to form sort of company in the United States. It's much less intense than forming like a corporation. I formed that and I had to figure out a way to make money. And so I had a computer engineering degree. I had just come from Boeing as a robotics, engineer. I had some, ability to add value immediately into a world where they really needed this value. So I was able to make these drivers incredibly quickly that were better than anyone else's. And it was the first time that brainwave data was being natively ingested into a web browser, which would go on to be like the de facto way that we would innovate at Neurosity. And I wasn't focused on making money in the beginning. And so I think that's sort of why I preface this all with like, I didn't have this continuous stress of needing to make money that gave me the freedom to just try to follow my heart. I on purpose did an amazing job. And it was, I used unit tests and the whole thing was validated and tested. And I would write reports on it. And like all of a sudden, OpenBCI was like, can we pay you for this to do this to our other stuff? Right. So I got very lucky and I already had some business prowess. I was raised by a lawyer, so I knew how to make a contract. I knew how to advocate for myself. I knew how to protect my intellectual property so that anything that I created outside of the company that I was consulting for would be mine, right? And so I had all of this sort of training. I went to a boarding school, and I had all this understanding of how to try and beat the system. I was in a fraternity and I was the vice president of it. So I learned how to run the internal operations. I was the treasurer another time. So I learned how to do the finances. And if you can get a 18-year-old to pay you $600, that was really hard. But, I learned the ways to motivate people to pay, so in a very polite way, of course. But like, I had all this really unique training that I always felt like today, this moment right now, I have been training for. Even giving this podcast, I've been training for it and have been showing up. And I think a lot of what, I've done is just show up places. There were, of course, challenges in starting the startup, right? That is like, where do you get money from? How do you pick a co-founder? I had tried for a while there to like listen to what SaaS, software as a service, co-founders are saying on how to raise money. But it turns out that is absolutely useless for making a hardware product. Then all of a sudden, I didn't have a PhD. So the VCs were sort of saying, what the heck do you know about being in this space? So finding a venture capitalist to take a bet on me required, finding this incredible co-founder, Alex, which was a very natural co-founding partnership. He approached me at the same time I approached him to start a company. Previously to that, I had tried going to NYU to find a co-founder during like a pitch competition because everyone said it's really hard to invest in solo founders and you're technical, so you need someone who does business. And I was just trying to really follow this cookie cutter course. And, it didn't work because I wasn't making this quick SaaS program that could scale in 2 to 3 years and have the return. It was clear that what I was working on was different. So that in and of itself was brought with tremendous friction. So I think that was okay though, because of this privilege that I had. So if I imagine that I didn't have this generational security and wealth and programming that I was given in society, I would think that, starting with something that is more readily acceptable by the fundraising community, especially if you want to be able to leave your job and do this full time, may be advisable, such that having your first success on an easier software and exiting, and getting some sort of monetary exchange, even if it's a $10,000 sale, just get that rolling. If you build a business doing $1,000 a month, and you have 10,000 people going to your website, that's significant, and you can build that from anywhere in the world. So I would really say, like, the number one thing that gave me the ability to pursue something so great was this continuous ability to be successful because I didn't have this burden of financial insecurity. So get the finances secured first and foremost. That's going to be the biggest, thing that will give you strength. Have this thing that you're able to fall back on if possible. And if not, then I would say try to start with something easier. Get a job that will pay you enough so that, you can have this extra cash that will be like a savings for you. Obviously, that requires getting an amazing job, though. And that's sometimes not feasible because you're not happy enough in your current job to be able to even want to do this job again for a bigger company. And it's going to be more stressful. Like that may not be possible. So I think ultimately I would say try to find some means to generate passive income while you're working another job. And that way you don't have to leave this job, but you're able to sort of do this double-edged attack on your calling, or even like a stepping stone to be able to do your calling is probably like the number one thing to get started. Something that continuously gives you this reality check that it's hard to build something that people give you money for, but that it's possible. And it's something that if you survive long enough, you will be successful. I don't think anyone who survives in this field of technology is unsuccessful. It's those who stop and go back to the way things were that are not successful. If you stay in this and you try to survive, you will pivot and find what ultimately is success and, people paying for your product and you having this engine and this financial security and all this good stuff. But I think ultimately it really starts with that financial security. And then that will give you this ability to follow your heart and not your wallet. And I think then all of a sudden the possibilities for creating something that has tremendous impact is more attainable. And I think that's really where it all comes from. That's the best advice I could give, and I think ultimately I'm not in a position to explain how to go from 0 to 1 when it comes from personal, wealth or situations, but I'm certainly here to help when it comes to, the other aspects of it and scaling or putting a deck together, things like that, building a network when you have no network, all those types of things I've done. But the hardest part, I think, that anyone in the world is going to have to do is come up with that way to have financial security, that biting the bullet and moving home with your parents. But sometimes that's not even possible, right? So I think find a way to get that, then find a way to start chipping away at your calling. And it doesn't have to happen overnight. Life is long. I like to joke where like I've already been doing this for 9 years. And that's amazing to me that I've been able to do this for that long, and I'm grateful for the 9 years that I've had. I'm grateful I get to do it today, and I'm optimistic I get to do it tomorrow. Right. So it's hard to achieve it, but it is possible, but it takes a lot of time. And for sure, there's going to be like doubts and sadness, and it's a roller coaster. But I think ultimately it's like a sine wave, that's moving linearly up. And it might feel today you're at like a low, but compared to where you were 2 years ago, it's still a little bit higher than where you were. And, compared to 5 years ago, it's way higher than where you were. Right. And in this given moment, you will always have an instantaneous issue that is causing you stress, but that's simply an instantaneous representation of your current reality and context. And that's always going to be changing. And, being comfortable with doing the uncomfortable so that you can, be able to survive in this field is worth it, and that's the learning that an entrepreneur has to make, is that it's not all working on the shiny object. In fact, at least 51% of the time is not working on something that is interesting, creative, novel, or urgent. I think a lot of entrepreneurs will like abuse drugs or try to get, different caffeines, different things like that, to sacrifice their body in a way that they think is worth it for this entrepreneurial success, which ultimately, I think does end up backfiring. But there is certainly a time where it feels like in every entrepreneur's journey, where like if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to throw everything away at a moment's notice. And that doesn't really go away. And you think that it's this big, intense moment where you have to make this huge decision. But it turns out you got to get comfortable with those. And those are the decisions you have to make all the time. You have to be willing to fire. You have to be willing to forgive yourself and show yourself compassion for making the best decision that you could at the time, even though it wasn't the perfect decision. And yeah, you wasted that money but you learned and there was good that came out of it. And it's telling the story of the good. And it's that whole process that I think is this muscle that every person has to learn how to foster themselves in that entrepreneurial journey. It's very easy once you get comfortable in the change, and there may be ups and downs, but ultimately I can just remind myself that, this is a privilege to be able to work on this. I could always go work another job, but today I'm choosing to practice this. To whom much is given, much is expected. I get to have the privilege of chasing my calling. I'm using the fact that I was, placed here on this earth at this time to the best of my ability. And even in 20 years, if I realize I think that I was wasting my time right now, I think I would still try to have compassion and say that, at that time I was doing what I really believed was the right thing to do. And that's okay. Life is complex. It's not black and white, it's gray. The decisions that were made then were complex. It's never as easy as it is as when I remember it, right? And recall it. It's always like, wow, I can't believe I didn't make that choice. But it's so much more complex than that. And I think just building that muscle and that self-compassion is really critical, and so I think super important to learn all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very important information to keep in mind for those who are just starting. I would like to ask some questions that are relevant to other listeners or asking about careers development. One of the questions is career development as consultant for neurotech startups, for neurotech companies. And you actually were doing it, like you said, for OpenBCI. Can you share your experience about that? How to become a consultant, how to approach a company to start providing this type of services, and also how relevant it is in the current market.
I like to think I started one of like the first brain computer interface consulting companies because I was the only one really doing it at the time. It turns out, if you have something to give that the companies don't have, then you can really consult. So I think, if you're a programmer, you can program for companies, right? And you can consult in that way. But I think consulting really is like an amazing sort of entryway to get into the, get your foot in the door, right? Like I didn't have any credibility in the space, but all of a sudden now that I was making the drivers and software and working on all the stuff for OpenBCI, I had this, sort of ability to cross sell. And all of a sudden companies who wanted to remix or edit, OpenBCI stuff were being pointed to me by OpenBCI at that time. And they were saying, hey, go to AJ, we're not making custom widgets for the graphical user interface, but he certainly can, right? You start getting a reputation that way. And consulting is all word of mouth, right? It's really not approach and, get sold, because I can't tell you how many messages I get a day from software consulting companies on LinkedIn and through my inbox. It's never ending. So it's really not a good source. But the answer really is like when someone in the BCI space is looking for a consultant, they'll generally ask other BCI companies. And so you're sort of will get in that way where they'll say, oh, yeah, I use this company to do that. They help me through hardware or, something, like through that mindset. Ultimately, I am very thankful for consulting, was that it provided that extra money that I was able to then put towards my own rent, living expenses. I was able to move out of my parents' house and live in New York City, at least in Brooklyn, and be able to, work. And that's really what consulting did. But there was this unrelenting feeling, and this is going to sound dramatic, but this is literally what I called it. It was like selling my soul. And I really felt like every hour that I was consulting was another hour that I was like selling my soul. And there's 168 hours in the week. It's really easy to see if you do 20 hours a week, you're doing, a significant percent of your week, you're selling your soul. And any minute that you're doing that, you also then find that even the minutes that you're not billing, right? When you're taking a shower and you're sitting there, all of a sudden you have an idea about the solution to the problem that you were working on, but you're not billing in that moment. And it's this incredible discomfort. And I think that's really hard to sit with for a long period of time, because all you want to do is go full time on your projects. All you want to do is raise money. You want someone to give you money and believe in you so that you can go full time. And it didn't happen for me. It literally never happened until I just was ready to bet on myself to make my own hardware, and at that time I had Alex and we had, we're just sort of starting this company, and I was still consulting even through the start of Neurosity to the end of 2018. So when we were able to raise our first $100,000 and we're able to start, because we had our deck together and we had what we were going to do and we had a lot of the initial stuff. We didn't have any hardware really, other than like maybe a circuit board or two in my hand. But, that was enough for us to get started and to stop the consulting. There has certainly been moments in Neurosity's time where Alex and I have looked to each other and says, should one of us go consult and like to bring in some cash flow or something, So I think it never goes away. And it's always this sort of lever that once you have a skill established, you can sort of figure out how to market it, whether it's through Upwork or, through another company, but just getting started, and with the whole open source ethos of today where, you have all these neurotech companies that are providing, SDKs that you can, and APIs that you can sort of create your own software with, is really impressive. Even if you're in marketing, selling these products, doing the user research is, a huge issue with a lot of these neurotech companies, and discovering what is the one thing we actually need to make and sell that our customers will buy and hold us accountable to and get tremendous return on investment. Showing that you have the ability to do that, even if you never even ship a product, but just get people excited about one thing, or galvanize people. I think that's enough to really start showing that you can consult and you have the ability to help this company with distribution in the digital world, right? And it's like a lot of little things like that where you don't have to have a programming degree. Of course, you have a programming degree, go make some open source code and, go make a project and put it on GitHub and tweet about it or something, right? And start showing people what you can do. I think it's really easy when it's like that, but when it's more like this business development, I think you need to make case studies that you can sort of show people, like, look at why things work and what you would do differently, so that when you do have that opportunity to talk to these, CEOs and C-level people to get their approval, you're ready to go and you can highlight what you're good at, right? I think everybody is at least good at one thing and can get really excited and hyped up about one topic, at least. I believe that's like within every person. And that's the thing, I would say, that little thing inside of you that refuses to die and go away. Like, that's the thing you should consult on, because it's going to be at least close to your calling. And when you are selling your soul, and you know that you're selling your soul and it feels not so great, you could still tell yourself that this is really close to what I want to do. I'm learning, I'm getting my name in this field, I'm building my reputation here. All of these connections I'm making today will eventually come full circle when I do have my own company, and I think that, like, that's critical for this idea of consulting into a company that you're going to do, right? I found that when I was doing non-BCI consulting, it would really mess me up. Like, people would say, "Hey, AJ, I know you just made a couple of iPhone apps. Help me make this iPhone apps for listing bars like around you, and so people can check in and see which bars are hot or something," right? Which is like standard funny app designs that people ask people to make for them. And I had to very quickly learn to say no. Like, that's not what I want to do. Because when I sell my soul doing that, it really feels like I'm selling my soul for no good reason, right? I'm not getting any better. This is just coming from a I need food on the table situation. And that's really where then you get into this stuck state that's really hard to get out of. And you have lost your financial independence. And so it's really important to keep fighting for that relevant work and to keep pushing for that, and if you can do that while you're working at another company, but build that LLC, a lot of other companies will actually support people on their entrepreneurial journeys. Some will not, but you're entitled to be able to do that so long as you don't work for like a secret government agency and you make conflicting technologies. But like, you're already in a special case. But for most people, I think create that LLC, give yourself that opportunity to learn, to protect your IP, and start learning the ins and outs of businesses and contracts and opening a bank account and getting a tax thing and filing taxes and learning about write-offs and so much stuff that you can learn while you're a consultant before you start making your company. And by the time you make a company, you can come with a little bit more business acumen than another person who didn't do consulting. And all of a sudden you have the advantage, because not only do you have that acumen, you also are making $2,000 a month and you're only selling 20 hours of your time a week, which means you have 80 hours a week to, continue to drive your business. You just say you're an entrepreneur, maybe you have 100 hours a week to drive your business, right? And essentially, you give yourself this opportunity. And if you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, making these hard decisions, telling people no when you know that you could, that's the stuff that makes you successful when you're an entrepreneur, because it's all about focus when you start that business. I talk a lot about, when people ask me, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you make a Unity driver? Can you make an Unreal Engine plugin? The answer is very quickly no, because I'm focused on focus and I have no business doing anything else. And the only reason that you're able to even use my device today is because I have been focused on focus and driving a reason for people to be able to buy it and support the company, even in its own, for you to even be able to have an SDK to use, right? Like, so it's valid. And, your customer may not see it at that time, and it may be frustrating, but that'll actually walk you towards the right customer. And that learning to say no, that learning to know, to follow your intuition on what's actually important, all that stuff you can build in consulting. And you don't have to have this risk of returning an investor's money, stress or anything like that. And you can build that financial security, that reputation. So I would definitely do it again if I had the time. I think there's another alternative, which is you can go get like a PhD. I would just throw that out there. I think a PhD is the equivalent to running a consulting agency, in my mind, at least as someone who didn't do a PhD. So grain of salt, but seeing PhDs come out of PhD programs, having consulted and made open source libraries and worked for different, researchers and written papers. It's really like the same thing as consulting. You had a very low paying job that you felt like you were selling your soul, but at least it was impactful toward a larger vision, right? Like this whole thing. I think that's an alternative, right? Where if you don't have the capital to create a consulting company, but you have the desire to find a researcher that's doing something in your field and it has a doctorate program for you, you can actually get paid a little bit of money to do TAing and do that type of stuff to get you that consulting equivalent. So I would definitely say that although consulting is an option, there's certainly ways that you can get that same exact experience, that same exact reputation, that 10 years from now, whether I did my 3 years in consulting or you did your 3 years in a PhD, we both were able to get to the same outcome, which is a successful company because we catapulted our way from knowing nothing to knowing something and then building something, right? So I think there is many different ways to look at it. And consulting is simply like the learning of, if you can do it, it's simply the learning of information at someone else's dime, right? And I think that's like the amazing part, as you can learn if you can make it work for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very, very useful information. And you mentioned PhD several times, even when you were talking about the starting the company. Yes, some concerns of do you have PhD or not? And this is the question that many of our listeners are asking. Should I have a PhD to work in industry? Should I have a PhD to build my own company? To be successful? What is your take on that?
Context is everything. So I would certainly say it's based on your context and based on the financial security that you have. I think it's really like where you need to approach the problem. If you come from tremendous privilege and have the ability to fall back on your parents' house, and the worst thing for you, failure for you means you go live at home, in your parents' basement while you find a job. No, I don't think you need a PhD. I don't think so. I'm just saying that in regards to your question of starting a company. Do you need a PhD to start a company? You have an undergraduate degree or something, and you have this, or not even, right? But like, if you have that financial security, go fail until you have exhausted everything. And you're like, the only way for me to be successful is to get a PhD in that thing so that I can learn what I need to achieve technologically in order to exploit that physics and overcome this new field, right? Like, then get a PhD. Now, I think if you're coming from the other perspective where you don't have a PhD, right? I think there's two options for you. One is go to industry. In the best case scenario, you're working at close to a name brand, Fortune 100 company for 2 to 3 years. That's the same thing as getting a PhD. That's the same thing as going and getting a graduate degree from MIT. If you work at Apple, Google, Tesla, SpaceX, any of these large companies that VCs will recognize and funders will recognize, I think then, you have that alternative. And then the last one, you're sort of like in this medium phase where you have this somewhat financial backing that it's not going to be so close, but you can at least be successful in learning complex topics because you're not 100% worried about food. And the bare minimum salary that they give you as a PhD will be enough. Then I think go get your PhD and use that as a way to get your consulting, as a way to make money and to keep pushing your pursuits, and then start a company after that. Because, if you're coming from this with just an undergraduate degree or no undergraduate degree, I think if you don't already have something that is like pulling you out of bed to make it, that you feel like you have the insights and the ability to make, right? Like I literally didn't know how to make hardware. So I knew that I didn't have that ability. I knew I needed to physically learn how to take my computer engineering fundamentals, and I needed a guru to teach me how to make printed circuit boards and order the parts and lay them down and heat them up and all this stuff. I literally didn't know that. So I had to get that body of knowledge. I could have gone and gotten a master's. I could have gone to industry and learned how to do that at a company. But instead, I did the consulting way and, ended up figuring out how to make my own product, learn that way and find a guru who could teach me and through a collaboration and all this stuff. So I think there are many, many different options. Context is everything. If you're asking yourself, should I get a PhD? Try to take a step back and look at your context in relation to all of these other people in the world, and try to understand what do you have at your fingertips that can either be that safety net, can be that backing, or are you in this space where you need to get a job in industry so that you can get capital? I think in that case, you would want to try to get your foot in the door at one of these name brand companies so that when you do start that company, you at least ex-Google person is starting blank, right? Then you want to like really harp on that. But I think in today's world with ChatGPT and all that stuff, I think if you have privilege, I don't think you need to go get a PhD immediately before you go fail for a couple months and years, right? Like go fail for a while and then get the PhD, because you will know exactly in that moment what you need the PhD in. It's not like, yeah, I'm going to see if this PhD leads me to find my calling. It's like my calling is blocked by this knowledge that I need to obtain through a PhD.
So it's what we call a statement of need that we need to fill.
Yeah, very context based. There is no, right answer to that. And when someone asks me that, I always just stop and say, just tell me about yourself. Like, give me your context. Where are you at? Right. Like, and I try to understand exactly where they're at. And then the answer is very clear to them when they realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned that you didn't know how to build hardware. You knew everything about software. So, what skills did you need to gain, to develop, to start actually building hardware and build this absolutely amazing device that you created?
Yeah. So there was this huge complaint that I heard all throughout college from my like people in my major that was like, why are they not teaching us how to make iPhone apps? Like,
Mhm.
what is wrong with this curriculum? It never felt right. And I was working at this embedded systems company as a hardware test engineer, testing designs of other hardware people, not making the hardware, but like poking it and stuff, and seeing it turn on to the right voltage and stuff like that. And I remember meeting this incredible technician, this hardware technician. He sort of helped me understand that anybody, regardless of background, can go learn how to solder, right? Like, can learn how to be a hardware technician. You can learn, it does not require a degree to become a hardware technician. You can do an apprenticeship, like becoming an electrician, becoming a plumber, all of these types of things, these trade jobs. And that's really what working with hardware is. And so that demystified it a lot. But what I understood was that college was teaching me the fundamentals so that I could build new computers. And that was really interesting. And so I sort of gave myself some compassion in that, like, hey, it's okay that I don't know how to build bill of materials and order parts and do this whole, I mean, I didn't even know at that time. It was just like this, I had this really huge desire to ship a hardware device, ship at least one hardware device that I designed. And I just had this huge, huge desire to do it. But I just knew, I took the fundamentals of electronics in college. I learned all about electrical engineering. I really knew the fundamentals. And all of a sudden, when I got to this time where I wanted to make hardware, it was so easy because I knew the fundamentals of computing. I knew that resistance would change the voltage on the other side of it. I knew that capacitance can store charge. I guess I understood that if you put two of those together, you're going to get like a filter. And I know that batteries are a power source. And if you put two of them together in series, they add. And if you put them in parallel, they improve the capacity. And some of this is fundamentals that I knew to be true, that V equals IR, and all of these like fundamentals were enough for me to be able to take a technician level class and quickly ace every part of it, because it's simply filling in the gaps of, oh, okay, that's how you pick the resistor. Oh, you just look at the data sheet and they tell you what resistors and capacitors you need around it. Okay, fine. Like, it was all very, very easy. So I think that computer engineering degree allowed me to jump back and forth between software and hardware, eventually, finding out about firmware and how that works. But it just really gave me this ability to jump back and forth. And by the time I got to a place where, I had really mastered software, I had understood firmware, I had reprogrammed all of OpenBCI's firmware, I had rewritten all of their GUI, and the data acquisition for their GUI, their graphical user interface. It was at that moment that I was ready to work on hardware and had this hardware project that I needed to make, because I couldn't, no matter what firmware I wrote with the current OpenBCI hardware, it wouldn't work on Wi-Fi. It wouldn't work at max speed. So I had to make hardware that plugged into it, that gave it Wi-Fi abilities. And that was the first thing I made, because we were blocked by hardware. And I think really a lot of the hardware innovation that I've done out of necessity, where the hardware just doesn't exist for us to be able to even write the software that will give the user experience that we know a consumer needs to have. So let's make new hardware. And that's really always been my drive for making hardware. But I did have that low level fundamental understanding of electronics. Keep in mind, I was doing Linux when I was a little kid. I was reading the book on C when I was like in 10th grade, and senior year of high school, I was doing the AP computer programming. I did fail the AP computer programming test. So keep that in mind. I got like the worst grade on it, and I did try. But, by the time I got to college, I was learning those fundamentals. I had all the software, and, hardware just felt like this final frontier, this thing that some people knew how to do and some didn't. And like, why couldn't I be one of those people that would know it, ever since then, it's really been just this amazing challenge to do hardware. It's this unrelenting challenge where you can't see it. You really can't like see it like you can run through lines and code. And it's this like thing that you have to get working. And you don't know why it's not working, because it should work in your schematic, right? And everything should work. And you struggle for days and days. It's so hard. You're like, what did I do wrong? And there's no one to tell you what you did wrong. There's no one to turn to but yourself. And all of a sudden, you come back on Monday, you look at it and you see the problem, you fix it, and it works perfectly. And you go and you make another one, and it works perfectly. And you go and you order 100 of them, and they all work perfectly. And that's this beauty of hardware that you don't get with software, where once it works every time. And that was incredibly motivating for me when it came to hardware. And now all of a sudden I know my software is going to work, because I made the hardware that I know works every time for this purpose. And now all of a sudden my software will work really well. And it's always really been this balance, of like software need to making new hardware, and I think that's generally why I got into it, and the skills I needed to be able to do it. I think from a high level, I'm a very good system level architect, which ultimately means I'm capable of understanding the hardware requirements necessary to solve the software requirements, and what are the minimum viable components we need, and how do we get this to fit together. And I just am very good at that from, all these years of training across different domains, which gives me the ability to then say, oh, we don't need Wi-Fi for this. We only need Bluetooth. Whereas we must have, a CPU for this. We can't use a microcontroller. We must use a CPU for this, right? And just those different understandings, I think, really came from that computer engineering degree, learning the fundamentals. But at the same time, it's the same stuff as building that computer when I was like 9 years old and learning that independence and those processes and the checklists and my time at Boeing and all that stuff, I think really contributed to give me the tools I needed to be successful when it came to hardware. That willingness to fail, over and over and over again, and to not give up. That was just something that was ingrained in me from childhood, right? So I think hardware requires a lot of specialization, not just in the fundamentals of electronics, but in system architecture and knowing computers and especially when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to make hardware, you have to know everything because you can't hire a huge team, right? So you really have to like take this holistic approach, and at the same time there's a level of mental fortitude that hardware requires that software does not require. I think it really is like at a certain point you're ready to start approaching it, when you have that mindset that I can fail for weeks and I still will be, I still have this calling in me to make this thing. I still have the financial dependency that I don't have to stay up all night figuring this out because my life depends on it. I can put this down. I can go and pick it up again on Monday because I can go do my consulting over the weekend, right? And you're learning and you're giving yourself this compassion to experiment with hardware, and it takes time and it's ugly and it's confusing. And all of a sudden, then you have to get it, tested by the FCC. And this thing that was working perfectly is emitting noise in a spectrum that you didn't even know existed, in a world that you didn't even know existed, and you can't even see it. And they're telling you that if you ship this, the FCC is going to sue you. And you're like, what? I didn't even know this was a thing. What do you mean I have to go change it? And you go back 9 times to a place that's 2 hours away, and you fail over and over again, and you're spending $2,000 a day so that someone can tell you you can't ship this product. And it's in those moments that you have to practice that mental fortitude and that desire and that strength that comes from within, to push through those incredibly hard times when it comes to hardware.
If you would list 3 skills, technical skills that are absolutely necessary for a person to build hardware in neurotech, what would those be?
Basic programming, in like C or Rust, but very basic programming, not in like your JavaScript or, your higher level Python languages. Maybe you can get away with that. But I think if you want to build your own hardware, it's really helpful to know a low level language. I think you need to know the fundamentals of electronics, what's a resistor, what's a capacitor, what's an inductor, what's a battery, what's a power supply, what's alternating current, what's direct current, what are the differences in that? What is electromagnetic noise? What is digital signal processing? There's all of this complexity that comes with designing circuits that are able to measure the brain, because the brain is in analog and in ions, and computers are digital and work with electrons. So there's this like literal bioincompatibility between people and computers that you have to overcome. And in that inference and in that intersection, there's a lot of noise and interference, and it's incredible what you have to overcome. So just this basic understanding of electronics, I think, is really helpful, especially because like it just seems like everything is frequencies. And when you can essentially build a contraption that can measure the frequencies of the thing you're trying to measure, all of a sudden now you can be successful. Whether that's like a traffic light that's improving the flow of traffic, it's like you have to be able to build the system that can start monitoring. And so that's really where this, need for electronics and understanding comes from. And then the third technical skill to start, as much as I don't want to say it, you take like a fundamentals of neuroscience type class, and at least learn the fundamentals of neuroscience to a point where when you have a conversation with a PhD, your time is not spent trying to understand the brain, but it's simply trying to understand their advice on how you can attack the part of the brain that you're trying to attack. I mean, attack's a bad word, but like the point of the conversation with the PhD must not be to teach you fundamentals of neuroscience that you could have learned on ChatGPT or in a textbook. It's actually required that you learn that basic knowledge so that when you're at the table and they're talking about source localization or, out of phase, brain activity, what that means because you have that electrical background and you learned about the frequencies, and all of a sudden the brain's doing the same thing. And an EEG is simply a voltmeter that's measuring microvolts. And you can make these sort of corollaries between these different fields. So I would say, low level programming, fundamentals of electronics, and fundamentals of neuroscience would be the three things that would put you in a good position. The fundamentals of neuroscience was the first thing that I learned after, mastering software. Once I, really understood the fundamentals of neuroscience, which was taught to me by PhDs, taught to me by my own self-learning, from trading my programming skills for their study skills, their analysis skills, all that type of stuff. After trading that, then all of a sudden I was in a position where I could master the hardware. And because I had that background of electronics, was I able to, quickly be successful with building hardware, writing the firmware for it, understanding how this would change the, impact brain activity, all that type of stuff, and the speeds at which we need to be monitoring data and all this type of stuff, all really tied together and allowed me to make, that hardware. And then eventually when I had that big epic failure of pitching, my company with a co-founder that I somehow found at NYU that didn't end up working out, and was on stage and my demo failed to think to scroll because there was too much Bluetooth in the room. And I'm walking out and I have this incredible strike of genius type moment where I realize, oh my gosh, the computer needs to go on the headset and we need to do all the processing there if we actually want to make autonomous systems. Because as I was walking through Grand Central and it was so packed, I remember thinking to myself, a lot of the demos around that time were helping people in wheelchairs drive wheelchairs just by thinking. And I realized that if we wanted to do that, if I wanted to give this to someone who was using this to drive their wheelchair to go catch a train in Grand Central, that device is not going to have to be dependent on any other device for processing. In fact, this one device is going to be sending control commands to the chair saying go forward, not sending it to a laptop that's then doing the processing and doing the pattern recognition and all of the digital signal processing and conditioning and all this stuff. And I realized, oh my God, and you have to put the computer there and that solves that problem. It's going to introduce this one, but oh my gosh, now I can port this entire code base that was running on my Mac. I can port it to the headset, and now I can run Python and JavaScript on my actual headset. And all this type of stuff just only was there because I understood the fundamentals of computing. I understood the fundamentals of brain imaging, of machine learning. Losing a sample, losing raw data in machine learning kills it. Like, I just knew all of this information that really put me into that good position.
Thank you so much, AJ. What is the best way to learn about your company, about your product, and get in touch with you?
Oh, great question. The best way to contact me is really probably through Twitter. That's where I'm most active. I'm also active on LinkedIn. You can go to any social media, and my name is the same across all of them. It's Andrew, Jay Keller. So Twitter is like at AndrewJayKeller. You can go to andrewjkeller.com and link to my Instagrams and other things like that. Check out Spotify under AJ Keller. You can see some of the other podcasts that I've been on. On LinkedIn, it's once again at Andrew J. Keller. So try to be as consistent and helpful there. If you want to learn about the company, Neurosity, that's NEUROSITY.co. It's not .com, it's .co. And that's where you can learn about Neurosity. You can also follow my co-founder, Alex Castillo. He's an amazing designer, software engineer, brain-computer programmer. He is on Twitter at Castillo, CASTILLO_IO. And he's an amazing person to follow as well. Both of those will give you really nice insights into the journey that we're going on. And if you are interested, come join the Discord. There's a Neurosity Discord that's pretty active, and you can meet other like-minded people there as well who also have the CROWN and, start building a little community there if you're looking for one.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you so much. Another question is that I know that you have a wonderful program where people can rent your equipment on month by month basis. Is that correct? Can you tell a little bit more about that? That paying $99, I think, each month they can try the crown. How does it work? Yes.
In a startup, sometimes you have to be willing to throw everything out at a moment's notice in order to be successful. And unfortunately, the thing you're describing is not sustainable at this current moment because I have completely restructured the entire company to attack this next generation of device that you can buy outright instead of paying monthly because it's affordable. And ultimately, the infrastructure to power that rental program is really intense. And it did work to get thousands of people trying it without even having to buy it. And, we have some customers that are still on it. We still have about like 250, 300 people who are on that rental program. But right now, we are just doing full sales of new crowns through our website by popular demand. People wanted to keep purchasing the crown. So we did another production run. We do have a fleet still of rental devices that we may open the rental program back up at a later time, but certainly not something I would look at. But unfortunately, the macroeconomic environment killed that business model. That business model was started in 2021 when we were able to get financing for every single crown that was added to this fleet. And so when we would make a crown, this financing company would give us $1,000 and they'd say, pay us back over 2 years. And we'd be like, all right, let's use this for cash flow. And it's this amazing flywheel. But since the growth stage funding environment for startups fell out and went away, all of a sudden the ability for these equipment financing companies to get funding and get deals done for these startups that didn't have, 2+ years of runway in the bank, they all of a sudden were not able to make those deals. And all of a sudden we weren't able to get that $1,000 per crown. And in fact, now we're losing, hundreds of dollars when we ship that crown out. It wasn't a sustainable business model, unfortunately. So we had to stop that. It was a great lesson in how macroeconomic trends can have ramifications down the road that are unseen, especially when they're happening and that they're going to do something. So we really learned a good lesson there. But ultimately, the company is hyper focused on making this next generation product, the size of a nickel. It has a travel case that'll fit in your pocket. You can take it anywhere with you. It's going to power these mental shifts as a service and will be very easy to put on, fit all head shapes, hairstyles, work on all skin colors. That's the most important thing we can do to work on. And, I'm willing to put everything else on hold. I'm not going to try and grow the B2B business of the crown right now. This is not that time. This is the time that we take a step back, take a deep breath, try to ask ourselves what is fundamentally critical for us to reach this next milestone, and that we only work on the things that will help us reach this next milestone. And so all that being said, that program that you're talking about is not open right now. And there's a very good chance it never opens again unless we get that equipment financing back that allows us to offset the cost over a 2-year period, or we lower the cost of the crowns. There's a possibility we open up, you can pay for 6 months in advance and then you can get the rental crown. But, I think ultimately I keep stopping people when we have those thoughts because I'm like, hey, we should be putting all this energy into thinking about the next gen device, the user experience, all of that. All of this energy that you're giving me right now is great, but we need to redirect that into the next gen product because it's not in my hand yet. And when it's in my hand, then we can maybe talk about what you're talking about, but not yet. We must focus. We must stay focused on focus. We must be relentless in our pursuit of, what we think at this moment is going to be the best and most impactful thing for the company.
Yeah, and through all your talk, I see how you are focused on focus.
Yes.
Uh, and
Critical.
critical, yes. And it might be that your product that you develop is one of the main factors or one of the contributors, at least, for you to stay on that focus. So,
Yes, it's
yeah.
very ironic.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, AJ. It was absolutely amazing, amazing conversation. I know that
Likewise.
our listeners will find so much helpful advice and information from what you shared today. And as we're ending our podcast, is there anything you would like to tell our listeners today?
I really appreciate a lot of the questions you were asking. I really appreciate your optimism about this space. I love that. I think a lot of my community members and friends would love to hear this podcast too. It's a nice catch up. So I thank you for asking me here and giving me this opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a great, great pleasure. And I wish you and your company all possible success. So thank you. And
Likewise.
we'll be following your developments for sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dear NeuroCareers podcast listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the entrepreneurial world of neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I hope you've been inspired by the stories of those who are turning groundbreaking ideas into impactful realities. If you are looking for more guidance on succeeding in NeuroCareers, book a free consultation with me, your podcast host, Dr. K, at the Institute of Neuroapproaches. So, what are you waiting for? Let's navigate the path to success in the world of NeuroCareers and make the impossible possible together.